Hey hams, it's Kevin, AD0IM. I'm here in my shack today. It's pretty cold outside. We had a little sleet and ice yesterday and a little bit of snow overnight, but it's just too darn cold to get outside and do anything interesting. So I thought I'd give a little tour of the shack today and talk about a couple of points of interest that are near and dear to me about it. I love looking at shack tours on the other YouTube videos that are out there. I'm always fascinated to see how people have their shacks arranged and what kinds of equipment they have, and so what kinds of ideas I can borrow or steal from others, because that's how most of us get along in the hobby, to be true and honest to ourselves. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is my main operating position and my only operating position. I'm a Macintosh guy, so I've got a 27-inch iMac. That's kind of the command center for all the activities here. I use MacLogger DX for logging. It's really the most versatile application for the iMacs that is that's out there, and it's developed by a fellow up in Canada whose call sign escapes me. I'll add it to the caption here below. It's a wonderful app. You do have to pay for it, but it's wonderful at what it does, and I'd be lost without it. So my transceiver, we'll get zoomed in here, is an IC7300, pretty ubiquitous these days. A lot of people are using them. I am primarily a 20 and a 40 meter guy. The antennas that I have outside are 20 meter and 40 meter dipoles, and I think you've seen them before, at least the 20 meter. And so that's where I'm at most of the time. The antennas are cut pretty good for those frequencies, but just in case they're not, and just in case you can't figure it out yet, my signal flow moves from the left of my desk to the right. So the transceiver originates the signal. We'll come back to that switch here in a moment. And then we come over to the Mfj969 Versatuner. I bought this because I was playing around with doublets for a while, non-resonant antennas, and that was fun, but my backyard is just really too small to mess with wires in the air that are longer than you know, like 62 or 63 feet that aren't suspended between the two trees that I have to work with. So it doesn't get really a lot of use today unless I want to take my 20 meter antenna and kind of cheat and tune it to 17, or tune the 40 meter dipole to 15. So that's the 969. It's a 300 watt tuner, which might present a problem here in the future, because I'm currently analyzing, kind of speccing out what kind of amplifier I might add to the shack here, maybe later this year. And providing my antenna switching over here is a Ameritron Rcs-4. It's a 4-port switch that has, it's a remote switch. There's a box outside that the different coaxes are hooked up to, and it uses voltage. It sends voltage down the coax line to that remote unit to make the antenna switch, and so that means I don't need a control cable, separate control cable to run that switch. So that's been very useful to me, and I've been very happy with it so far. It's got a fuse inside. It's just a plain old glass fuse that has blown once, and I think that was because I was hooking coax into it after a storm, and I didn't short the coax out. But in any case, I keep extra fuses around, and it's only happened once in the 7 or 8 months that I've had it. So that's how the signal gets in and out of the house. There's nothing else fancy going on here. I do not have grounding or bonding going on here, so when bad storms approach, I disconnect as much as I can and try and leave some distance between the antenna coaxes and the house outside, so there's no threat of arcing, and that's worked well for me for the 3.5 going on 4 years that I've had the shack set up here in one iteration or another. You can tell by the Morse code part of the table here that I do Morse code from time to time. Both of my keys are Vibraplex. Bottom new, an iambic paddle, that's the standard on the left, and that's the deluxe bug over on the right. And then I use a wind keyer so that I can keep them both plugged in simultaneously. I'll do a separate video on that in the near future, and explain how I've got that set up. Then in the back, it's kind of hard to see here. This is not as clean as I would like it to be, but it is what it is today. And that's my PowerWorks power pole distribution point here that I plug my stuff into. So so that's how my power is distributed from my power supply, which is down here below. It's my Astron 35 something. I can't really see it from here. 35A. Pretty big piece of equipment. I often wonder why these linear power supplies have to be so large, but maybe one of these days I'll take the cover off and see what the big mystery is to my tiny little mind. So let me go back to this extra coax switch here. So we've all used these before to manually switch from one antenna to another when we're outside. But the one thing that I felt my shack was missing several months ago was a way to either plug an antenna analyzer into my setup, or to, as some may occasionally want to, if you're a single transceiver guy for the most part, plug an extra radio in just to play with or test the radio. And so I had an extra one of these switches laying around. So I put it in line with everything, and the single port out of the back of that switch plugs into my 969. I keep wanting to call that a 939. And then that gives me two inputs on the front for either radios or an antenna analyzer or a nano VNA. If you hate reaching around behind your equipment to unplug cables to plug in an analyzer, this is really a nifty little solution. The one thing you have to pay attention to is whether or not those ports, what kind of isolation those ports have from each other. Now, most of these mechanical switches do short the unused port to ground, so that shouldn't be a problem if you're using a mechanical switch of this nature. I had my FT891 that I use for Parks in the Air plugged in last night. I don't recall doing any transmitting. I was just switching back and forth, playing with the receive filter in on each radio, and I didn't run into any problems. But I will not have both radios powered up at the same time if I intend to transmit. So that's one way I get around the potential isolation issue. So so that's a pretty important piece of gear for me. I like playing with nano VNAs. I've got one down here just down below the shack with all the adapters and everything nearby. And I've also got a Rig Expert 55 zoom that I use for the bulk of my antenna analyzing whenever I make new antennas. Now, if you're a smart person, as I can occasionally be, you'll take the analyzer outside and you'll raise and lower your antenna as necessary while you make your tuning adjustments to it, especially if you're working with wire dipoles. But every now and then I want to take a look at things from the inside, and I don't want to have to go outside and mess with all of that. So that's the reason for the test access port. And also, if you run into a problem where your station's not behaving the way you think it should, or performing as well as you think it should, this gives you easy access to the antennas without having to go outside and mess with things, and at the same time not having to disassemble your entire shack to gain access to your antennas. So for audio, I have a couple of previously unused Bose cubicle speakers, or cube-shaped speakers, that one on each side of the riser here, that are plugged into a splitter on the back of the radio. So that gives me pretty good audio. It's not as good as you would think it would be with those, but it's better than just using the what is normally a very good speaker on the ICOM 7300. There's nothing wrong with that speaker at all. But with the riser, my audio was getting kind of hushed. So I found these in a tub over on the other side of the shack here, and got these plugged in, and they work pretty well for me. So so that's my shack. The antennas you've seen, you might have noticed over here on the antenna switch an input for a 80 meter antenna. There's an 80 meter dipole out on the back fence that's attached, and I think I've shown you that in a previous video, so I won't belabor that point too much, but I do have an 80 meter antenna on the fence outside. It's a dipole, at about 4.5 feet high. And that works pretty well for me for doing the NVIS stuff here in town, and the occasionally freaky looking DX, either to South America or Western Europe. So that's the shack today. Like I said, I'm kind of playing around with the idea of picking up an amplifier and putting it and adding it to the mix here. But that's going to require some little bit of engineering, trying to understand what kind of power I have coming over to the wall here, how much more I might need depending on the amp that I want, and then taking a look at all of my ancillary components here and making sure that they're up to spec for the amplifier that I eventually choose. So a little bit of work to do on that, but I'll let you know how we do. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video or catch you on down the log. This is Kevin, AD0IM.